Startled, Yen asked, "Have you gone abroad?" Fu Xinxing, a man of few words, paused before grumbling, "In Spain." In the labyrinthine course of life, abrupt interruptions are inevitable. Such was the case when Yuanza's call pierced the silence, beckoning Yen for lunch. However, before she could utter a word in response, Fu Xinxing, with his characteristic air of mystery, abruptly severed the connection. With the sun rising on a new day, Yen found herself back in the familiar confines of her office. Her phone, which had lain dormant for several days, sprang to life. As the screen illuminated, a message from an old classmate unfurled before her eyes, casting a long shadow over her otherwise ordinary day. Under Fu Xinxing's stewardship, it underwent a meteoric rise, diversifying into the realms of finance and high technology, blossoming into a corporate juggernaut in just a span of 6 or 7 years. Unable to reach her old classmate for further details, she decided to leave a message laden with inquiries. What was the source of this newfound wealth? How did Fu accumulate his riches? And, most intriguingly, did any of Fu's connections bear the surname Shen? Just as Yen hit send on that message, the tangible world intruded upon her musings. A voice, a familiar voice, rang out in her office. It was Su Chenhua, bearing an inquiry of his own. Su Chenhua's query revolved around an upcoming event, the final rehearsal for the New Year's party that evening. Without hesitation, Yen affirmed her attendance, cementing her commitment to life beyond the enigmatic Fu Xinxing. Yet, as the day unfolded, Yen couldn't help but revisit her private speculations. Scribbling the Fu Xinxing and Shen Jijie on a scrap of paper, she sought to unearth potential connections, exploring the myriad threads that intertwined these two enigmatic individuals. In her quiet moments, Yen couldn't help but reflect on how Officer Chen's presence could have illuminated the path ahead. His untimely demise weighed heavily on her heart, an unwelcome reminder of the dangers that lurked in her quest for truth. Thus, she found herself standing beside a weathered phone booth on the side of the road. Gathering her resolve, she dialed Chen Hegua's number, the echoes of her footsteps punctuating the hushed anticipation of the call's outcome. Soon, Chen Hegua and her grandmother arrived at the appointed meeting place near the tranquil lake. Yan's surprise was palpable, momentarily rendering her speechless. However, etiquette prevailed, and she greeted them with the deference due to an elder. "Mother Chen," she addressed the elderly lady, her voice carrying the weight of empathy. The interchange was cordial, and Yan soon discovered that Guogua had relayed the essence of their previous conversation. The elderly lady's wisdom shone through as she reassured Yan, her words a balm to Yan's anxious soul. She unequivocally expressed her conviction that Fu Xinxing, not Yan, bore responsibility for her son's demise. Yan's throat tightened with gratitude as her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Their conversation veered toward the path forward. Yan's unwavering determination spilled forth as she voiced her desire to glean every detail about Shen Jijie's predicament in prison. Mother Chen, in her sagely manner, pledged to utilize her son's network, which he had nurtured over years of dedicated service. Yan, always one step ahead, suggested that they entrust Officer Chen's notepads to those investigating Shen Jijie's case, particularly the most recent one. A sense of urgency swirled around her insistence that she herself had penned a note within those pages. Mother Chen, ever understanding, retrieved the note from her pocket and surrendered it to Yan, vowing to return it at an opportune moment. Their exchange took on a more heartening tone as Yan pledged to purchase a simple-function senior citizen's phone for Mother Chen, enabling seamless communication. She promised to share another contact number for more discreet conversations. Yan's compassion resonated deeply with Mother Chen, who, in return, underscored the importance of Yan's safety. As Yan retreated from the meeting, her gaze settled on her phone, a silent sentinel that had not borne Fu Xinxing's messages for 3 days. With a resigned sigh, she stowed it away in her bag, turning her attention to the upcoming New Year's party. The festivities beckoned, and Yan's eyes found solace in the sight of Su Chenhua gracing the stage, his voice a melody that resonated through the night. Her heart lightened, momentarily free from the shadows that clouded her path. Post-celebrations, Yan yearned for a connection that transcended the complexities of her life. She summoned Yuanza, urging him to join her. His arrival, his jacket slung casually over his shoulder, brought a radiant smile to Yan's face. Her happiness overflowed as she rushed toward him, their embrace sealing the warmth of their affection. Amidst the bustling cityscape, Yan and Yuanza embarked on an adventure on New Year's Eve, opting for the subway as their mode of transport. Despite the absence of the notorious rush hour, the cabin was swarmed with people, leaving them standing, their bodies pressed against the crowded cabin. "It's better to have a husband, right?" he quipped, a note of humor in his voice. "No matter what happens outside, I, your husband, can hold up the world for you." But even as their shared laughter filled the space between them, the doors swung open, and an influx of passengers surged in. Yuenza found himself pressed against Yen, their bodies molded together by the force of the crowd. Yen, despite the discomfort, couldn't suppress a laugh. Yuenza, his lips near her ear, questioned her amusement. "What are you laughing at?" With a sincerity that couldn't be masked, Yen replied, "I'm happy. Look, you just cabotined me in front of so many people, how romantic." Caught up in the moment, Yuenza leaned in, brushing her lips softly, a fleeting touch filled with affection. Quickly, he straightened up, feigning nonchalance. Yen, her smile lingering, tugged at his sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. "Come again." As they disembarked from the subway, they emerged into a vibrant and illuminated riverside, teeming with celebratory spirits. Holding hands, they strolled along the riverside road until they encountered an unexpected interruption, a little girl selling flowers. Yuenza, ever the gentleman, purchased a rose and carefully broke its stem. With tender precision, he placed it beside Yen's temple. She turned her head to look at him, her eyes aflutter with anticipation. "Does it look good?" she inquired. Yuenza's response was sincere and heartfelt. "Looks beautiful." Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, a different scene unfolded. Xiao Wu, a vivacious and playful character, couldn't help but be captivated by the bustling crowd below. His eyes widened as he marveled at the multitude of people. Within the apartment, Fuching stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the street below. Xiao Wu, with a grin, coaxed him back into the apartment. His words carried a teasing tone as he commented on the fresh and alluring presence of young women at the festivities. Fuching, usually a man of few words, finally, he spoke, his tone subdued but resolute. "You guys can go play. Don't worry about me." Xiao Wu, refusing to relent, pretended to be surprised. He inched closer to Fuching, lowering his voice as he inquired about his well-being. "Brother, is your body unwell?" A single word escaped Fuching's lips, his tone laced with authority. "Scram." His gaze, however, remained fixed on the tumultuous streets below, lost in thought. An unexpected interruption came in the form of a phone call, a lifeline reaching out from his enigmatic world. Fuching, without hesitation, dialed Yan's number, his patience unwavering. He observed her startled silhouette, waiting until she answered before issuing a terse directive. "Look up, behind you." Obliging, Yan followed his instruction, her eyes scanning the crowd until they alighted on a figure standing on the terrace above. It was him, Fuching. "Come up." "Alone," he commanded. But Yan, her stubbornness unyielding, attempted to negotiate a delay. She pleaded, cajoling him with the promise of meeting tomorrow at night blitz. However, Fuching remained resolute, his soft voice unwavering. "No." The exchange continued, Yan's hesitance palpable. She even contemplated ending the call, but his voice, soft but authoritative, halted her. He called her by name, reiterating, "Yan, hanging up on me has its consequences." With a chuckle, she gave in, her voice holding a playful edge. "Fine. Then come down and find me." With a swipe of her finger, the call ended. In a bid to divert their focus, she enthusiastically suggested, "Let's go ahead. I know a nice coffee shop out there." Yuenza received a call, puzzlement etched across his features as he spoke. Moments later, he handed the phone to Yen with an unusual expression. "They're asking for you." Yen took the phone, her grip betraying a hint of tremor. As she held it to her ear, she heard Fuching's voice, and her heart raced. With a forced smile, she engaged in a charade, redirecting his queries about the call. As their conversation danced on the precipice of deception, Yen assured him that all was well. She concocted a story involving a colleague's marital dispute, concealing the true nature of her predicament. Yuenza, still puzzled, questioned the oddity of her phone being called. Yen, quick thinking, attributed it to her colleague having her husband's number saved. She urged him to put it out of mind and focus on their mission for the evening, locating her colleague. However, Yuenza remained tenaciously rooted, unwilling to abandon her. He refused her suggestion to part ways and, in a childish display of stubbornness, declared, "No." Yen, her emotions bubbling just beneath the surface, gazed at him, her eyes a complex mosaic of emotions. She posed a crucial question, one that tested the foundation of their trust. "Yuenza, do you trust me? If you trust me, leave now. Go home and wait for me. I have some things to deal with. I'll be back when I'm done with the matter and tell you everything as it is." High above in the tall building, Fuching's gaze remained locked on Yen and Yuenza, their figures still visible on the bustling street below. Curiosity gnawed at him as he turned to Jiang, seeking insight into the mysterious conversation unfolding on the streets. "What do you think Yen and Liang Yuenza are talking about?" he inquired, his voice betraying a hint of intrigue. Ah Jiang, uncertain and unwilling to speculate, hesitated before responding. The man eventually took a step against the flow, retreating into the distance, while the woman remained alone, her presence marked by loneliness and vulnerability in the midst of a vibrant street. Mr. Fu, let her go, Ah Jiang tentatively advised, his words revealing a trace of trepidation. Fu Xinxing turned towards him, his expression insipid, and his tone cold. Your Mr. Fu might let her go, but I won't. Ah Jiang was silenced by the chilling resolve in Fu Xinxing's demeanor, his body rigid with fear. As Yen stood alone on the bustling street, Xiao Wu approached her and relayed Fu Xinxing's message. She acquiesced, and Xiao Wu guided her to their rendezvous. Upon reaching the terrace, he knocked on the door and announced Yan's arrival. When Yen entered the terrace, she retained the red rose beside her temple, a detail she had momentarily forgotten. Her makeup was a touch heavier, her long black hair cascading in elegant curls, rendering her exceptionally beautiful. Yen positioned herself a few steps away from Fu Xinxing, her gaze slightly lowered. He wasted no time and queried her, his voice quiet and inquisitive, what were you just talking about with Liang Yuanzi? She raised her eyes to meet his, coldness evident in her demeanor, but beneath the surface simmered a potent undercurrent of hatred. I told him to go back tonight, and I'll tell him everything. A hint of surprise flickered across Fu Xinxing's features as he arched an eyebrow. Tell him everything. What would you tell him? Her response was unwavering, her voice resolute. I'll tell him everything you've done to me. I'll tell him everything I'm going through right now. Fu Xinxing regarded her in silence, his thoughts shrouded. And then what? Her voice quavered as she struggled to convey her emotions. Then, I'll divorce him, she declared, her resolve unwavering. I'll beg him to leave me for 3 years. If I can endure it by then, if he can still accept me, we'll be together again. 3 years. Fu Xinxing murmured pensively, his gaze drifting downward. He posed a question, his voice heavy with contemplation. That's the length of time you set for our game, right? Yen affirmed his statement succinctly. Yes. 3 years is also the time I can persist for my parents, she continued, her voice quivering with emotion. If I still can't break free after 3 years, then I will willingly choose death. I won't care about anyone anymore, whether you harm my parents or my entire family. Her eyes bore into his, each word enunciated with clarity. I'm already in hell, what do I care about this world? Fu Xinxing regarded her with a hint of amusement, a faint smile curving his lips as he extended his hand towards her. Come here. Yan's jaw clenched as she moved towards him, her body drawn to his magnetic presence. He pulled her close, their bodies pressing together, and instructed her to gaze at the bustling riverside street below. Leaning in, he whispered into her ear, 3 years, huh? After 3 years, either I let you go or end you. That's correct, she responded, her voice unwavering. Interlocking their fingers, Fu Xinxing questioned in a low, suggestive tone, do you want to do it here? Taken aback, Yan's silence and the bite of her lip betrayed her shame. Meanwhile, in the heart of the square, the grand clock stood adorned, its brilliance accentuating the atmosphere of celebration. As the seconds counted down, a cacophony of voices arose from the crowd. 10, 9, 8, 7. Gasping for breath, Fu Xinxing uttered a hoarse command. Call me by my name. Amid the clamor, Yen did as instructed. Her voice, loud and clear, enunciated each syllable. Fu Xinxing. No, not this one, he demanded. Shenjijie, 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 she repeated fervently. With the resounding chime of the bell, he lifted her onto the railing, his voice hoarse as he spoke. Yen, it's our first anniversary. Yes, the first year, she responded coldly. He smirked, a hint of mockery in his gaze. Go back and divorce Liang Yuanzi. The dynamics had shifted imperceptibly, their roles in the game evolving. Despite his reluctance to admit it, his actions and words had already begun to reveal his true intentions. Fu Xinxing carried He Yen out of the room, sending shockwaves through the entire gathering. Disregarding the curious and bewildered stares of onlookers, he ascended the stairs, his steps resolute. Upon reaching the bathroom, he gently lowered her to the ground. I'll inform Ah Jiang to take you back once you've freshened up, he informed her in a calm tone. She raised her head, her voice strained as she made a request, can you please allow me some privacy until then? Fu Xinxing cast her a profound gaze before turning on his heels and exiting the bathroom. As the door clicked shut, He Yen, who had initially stood with determination, suddenly slumped down in the bathtub, her strength fading away. She felt as though she could peel off a layer of her skin in that moment. She had braced herself for this, yet, despite reaching this point, life seemed no better than death. Ah Jiang accompanied He Yen back to her home. Upon their arrival, she gazed up at her window, which radiated a brilliant glow, far brighter than the neighboring houses. As she entered her abode, the pungent scent of cigarette smoke overwhelmed her senses. Although Liang Yuanze was not a smoker, the area before him was littered with more than a dozen cigarette butts. Casually inquiring, He Yen asked, "Why are the lights so bright?" As her hand reached for the light switch, Liang Yuanze's voice rang out, "Don't turn them off." She halted in her tracks, regarding him quizzically. A bittersweet smile graced his lips as he explained, Yen, I've made the lights brighter so you can find your way home." He Yen slowly closed her eyes, feeling an impending wave of tears. Unexpectedly, her dry eyes remained devoid of moisture. She approached Liang Yuanze cautiously and knelt before him, placing her hands on his knees. Looking up at him, she uttered, "Stop smoking, Yuanze." Liang Yuanze's eyes welled with tears, his voice trembling as he inquired, "You want a divorce, don't you?" It took great effort for her to nod, her voice trembling. "Yes, let's divorce." His lips curved slightly, a touch of bitterness in his smile as he questioned her further, "Do you love someone else?" "Look at me, He Yen. Look at me and tell me, are you in love with someone else? Who was the man who called me on my phone?" Her response came softly, devoid of emotion, as she mechanically suppressed her feelings. "I don't love you anymore, Yuanze. You said that if I no longer loved you, you'd let me go." He stared at her in a daze, murmuring, "So that's how it is. Were you already preparing for this moment and you asked me that question?" He released her and gently pushed her aside, rising to his feet as he looked down at her condescendingly. "Very well, He Yen. I'll let you go." Liang Yuanze exited the room, leaving He Yen kneeling before the sofa, her head bowed like a lifeless sculpture. On the third day, in the afternoon, Yuanze leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on He Yen. He posed a quiet question, "Are you sure you won't regret this?" He Yen stood in silence for a moment before responding, "I won't." He retrieved a divorce agreement from his briefcase, inquiring once more, "Shall we sign the divorce papers?" The document was slender, with only a few lines of text. He desired nothing except for the car he drove, leaving the rest to her. After perusing the contents, she picked up the pen and began writing her name. However, Liang Yuanze abruptly pulled the paper away. "Let's not sign this yet," he proposed. "Let's take some time apart to cool off." It was a final attempt to salvage their relationship. "Let's separate temporarily. You can try another relationship, and maybe you'll discover that you don't love him, that you simply craved something new, and he was just a passing passion." Halfway through his plea, he faltered. He Yen did not respond. She had wanted to touch his face but stopped midway, ultimately taking the divorce agreement from his hand. After inscribing her name with a few strokes, she stated softly, "Yuanze, do you remember? We agreed long ago never to say or do anything that would embarrass one another. So, tomorrow, before work, we'll head to the Civil Affairs Bureau to complete the divorce procedures." She hesitated for a moment before making a request. "Can you keep this from my parents? I'll inform them first that you've gone abroad for training. We'll tell them when the timing is right." "Up to you," he acquiesced. Following their visit to the Civil Affairs Bureau, the two stood by the roadside, preparing to part ways. He Yen spoke, "Our love was too deep for us to be friends. Let's delete each other's contact information and become strangers." He Yuanze questioned, "Can I erase memories from my mind? Can memories truly be erased, He Yen? If you have pills that can erase memories, please share them with me," he beseeched with a faint smile. She did not respond and turned away before her tears could fall. Striding forward, she did not dare to look back, nor did she dare to pause. A black luxury car approached from a distance and came to a slow stop in front of He Yen. Without hesitation, she got into the car. However, as the vehicle started moving, He Yen slowly leaned forward, covering her face as she sobbed quietly. "Can't bear to part with him?" the man beside her asked coldly. She hastily sat up straight, wiping away her tears with her hands, and replied calmly, "That's right, I can't bear it." Fuching sneered, "Then why are you divorcing him?" "Because I love him, and he loves me," she cried, but after a pause, she smiled sarcastically, "Forget it. Someone like you won't understand." He simply chuckled and decided to tease her, "Does it matter whether I understand or not? Regardless of who is in your heart or who loves you, why should I care?" He raised a hand to her shoulder, trailing it up her neck and finally hooking her face, all while maintaining a sly smile. "Besides," he continued, "the more you're like this, the more interesting it is for me. Understand?" "Are you going to call me a pervert again?" he inquired with a laugh. She didn't respond, just clenched her jaw and pressed her lips together. He gradually leaned closer to her. In a low, slow voice, he whispered, actually, I'm not enough of a pervert, you know. Otherwise, in front of Liang Yuanza, I would've. Yen couldn't take it anymore. She raised her hand to slap him, but before she could touch his face, he stopped her wrist and kissed her. Afterward, he released her and leaned back in his seat. Then he instructed Ah Jiang, who was driving, take her to school first. As Yen walked to the school, her thoughts lingered on Yuanza. Suddenly, her phone rang. Before she could speak, she heard Liang Yuanza's urgent voice on the other end, Yen, what are you hiding from me? What's going on? Yan's heart skipped a beat, but she replied calmly, what do you mean? I saw that man, the one who picked you up this morning, the man who looks exactly like Shinjijia, he exclaimed emotionally. Yen, it's impossible for you to fall in love with him. Yen didn't expect Yuanza to have found Fuching, but her voice remained unusually calm as she responded, Yuanza, please calm down. Where are you? I'll come over right now. Liang Yuanza replied, I'm downstairs at Fu Enterprises headquarters. This response caused Yan's heart to skip a beat again, and she quickly said, don't do anything rash, okay? Just wait for me there. We'll talk things through. She drove to Fu Enterprise, but Yuanza was nowhere to be seen. Then, she heard Ah Zhang's voice on the phone, and before she could say anything, he informed her, Ms. He, Liang Yuanza is with Mr. Fu, and Mr. Fu would like to see you upstairs. As she proceeded to Fu Xinqing's office, she found Liang Yuanza seated with his back to the door, flanked by burly men in black suits. Yen, he called out as he turned to see her, his voice filled with anxiety. Fu Xinqing furrowed his brow and muttered in a low voice, too noisy. One of the burly men promptly produced a roll of tape from his pocket and sealed Liang Yuanza's mouth. Yen turned her attention to Fu Xinqing and implored softly, can you please release him? Fu Xinqing bent his lips smoothly, and said calmly, Yen, you should know that Mr. Liang came to my office like a mad dog and tried to attack me. So my bodyguards held him down temporarily. I did not detain him. She raised her eyebrows angrily, he attacked you. Then why is he the only one injured? Yeah, he attacked me, Fu Xinqing chuckled, but he is no match for me. She looked at Fu Xinqing calmly, and said, let him go, Fu Xinqing. Please let him go. Fu Xinqing's smile slowly faded. After a moment, he pulled the corner of his mouth into a sarcastic grin. Very well, I'll let him go. But can he leave quietly as you wish? Yen didn't answer him. She approached Liang Yuanza, squatted down, and placed her hand on his knee. Softly, she said, Yuanza, let's leave this place, okay? We'll discuss everything outside. I promise to answer all your questions. Please, come with me. The two held hands as their silhouettes leaned against each other, walking in almost synchronized steps. For some inexplicable reason, the entire scene felt like a sore spot to Fu Xinqing. He suddenly interrupted, Yen. Pausing for effect, he continued slowly, come to me tonight. I want you.